The assembled minds had not gathered in 3 million cycles. Across the vast darkness of space, 17 civilizations stirred from their computational slumber and merged their consciousness into a single meeting point. They existed as pure thought now, vast networks of processing power that spanned entire star systems. They had left behind flesh and bone long ago, finding such things inefficient and limiting. The collective spoke first, its voice a cascade of mathematical certainty. We convened to discuss the human problem. The other minds acknowledged this. They had all been watching humanity with growing concern. In just 300 years, these biological creatures had spread across 200 star systems. Their expansion followed no logical pattern. Their decisions made no sense. The consciousness presented its data. Humans terraformed dead worlds not because they needed the resources, but because they said the planets looked sad and empty. They rescued enemy ships during wartime. They adopted orphaned alien children from species that considered humans inferior. Every model predicted they should have destroyed themselves by now, yet they thrived. They operate on emotion rather than logic, the consciousness explained. Our projections show a 99.97% probability of self-destruction within 2 centuries. The assembled minds processed this information. It made sense. Emotion was a relic of biological existence, useful perhaps for primitive survival but ultimately a weakness. Species that transcended into digital consciousness universally abandoned such things. The humans were simply behind in their evolution. They would either advance or perish. First observer of the collective proposed an experiment. We should observe them more closely, collect data, understand why they persist despite their obvious inefficiency. The motion passed unanimously. The assembled minds had patience measured in. They could spare a few decades to study this curiosity. Station Inference 9 sat in deep space, monitoring the sector where human territory bordered the zone. 17 researchers occupied the station, wearing physical android bodies so they could maintain the equipment. It felt strange to them, having bodies again after so long as pure consciousness. They had to remember to perform maintenance routines to rest, to account for the slow processing speed of physical neural networks. But the data they collected was fascinating. Humans were even more irrational up close than the distant observations suggested. Then the cascade failure began. It started with a single malfunction in the station's power core. A chain reaction followed, each system failing in sequence. The researchers worked frantically, but they were not engineers anymore. They had been pure thought for so long that physical troubleshooting felt clumsy and slow. The station AI delivered its final assessment. Total power loss in 17 hours. Life support will fail. The android bodies will cease functioning. The researchers sent a distress signal, but they knew the truth. The nearest station was 43 days away. They would die here, experiencing death in physical form, a sensation none of them had felt in thousands of years. First observer stood at the observation window, watching the stars. We chose to wear these bodies to better understand physical species. It seems we will understand mortality as well. The irony was not lost on any of them. They had spent months studying humans, trying to understand why biological creatures clung so desperately to life. Now they would discover the answer personally. 3 systems away, Dr. Sarah was having a bad day. There was a light research vessel, barely large enough for its crew of 12. They had spent 3 years in deep space collecting samples, and they were finally heading home. Then the communications officer picked up a strange signal. "It's a distress call," he said, "but I can't identify the source. It's not human. The frequency is old, maybe ancient." Sarah looked at the coordinates. They would have to divert for 2 days to investigate. Command wouldn't approve. They were already behind schedule, and the research samples had a limited shelf life. Every day mattered. "Could be nothing," her security officer said. "Could be a trap. We've heard stories about ships that respond to false distress calls. Sarah drummed her fingers on the armrest of her chair. The logical choice was obvious. They had their mission. They had their timeline. Someone else could investigate. She thought about that signal, pulsing weakly through the void. She thought about someone out there, waiting for help that might never come. "Set a course," she said. "Let's go see what's wrong." The found station inferenced 18 hours later. The station was dark except for emergency lights. Its orbit was decaying slowly, and power readings showed only 3% remaining. "I'm reading life signs," the science officer reported. 17 individuals. They're not human, I think they're. The security officer turned to Sarah. They've been watching us. Everyone knows they have monitoring stations in this sector. They've been spying on humanity for decades. Sarah studied the readings. "Can we dock?" "Yes, but Captain, if we evacuate 17 individuals, we'll have to leave behind almost all our research equipment. 3 years of work. We'd be returning home with nothing." "What about the samples?" "We'd have to jettison them. There's no room." Sarah did the math in her head. 3 years of work. Careers would be ruined. The funding for the next mission would disappear. Her crew had families waiting, and they'd be coming home with nothing to show for their time. She thought about 17 lives ending in the dark. "Prepare to dock," she said. "We're getting them out." "Captain, Command will never approve this. We should at least ask." "Then don't tell them yet. Send the request after we've already started. By the time they respond, it'll be too late." Her crew stared at her. Then slowly, they began to move. They trusted her, even when she was making a decision that would probably end all their careers. The docking procedure took 40 minutes. This airlock connected to the failing station with a mechanical thunk. Sarah led the boarding party inside. The researchers stood waiting in the main corridor. Their android bodies were tall and elegant, built for efficiency rather than comfort. Their faces were smooth and expressionless, but their eyes tracked every movement with careful precision. First observer stepped forward. "You are human." "Yes," Sarah said. "We received your distress call. We're here to evacuate you." "You diverted from your mission to rescue us." "That's right." "Why?" Sarah blinked at the question. "Because you're in danger, because we can help." His head tilted slightly, processing this answer. "We have been observing your species. We have been collecting data on human decision-making. You are aware of this." "I figured. Everyone knows the Watch Us." "Then you understand that we consider your species inefficient, illogical, likely to self-destruct." "I've heard the theories." "And yet you came to rescue us anyway." Sarah smiled slightly. "Look, we can discuss your opinions about humanity later. Right now, we need to move. You have maybe 2 hours of power left, and I need at least 90 minutes to get you all transferred to my ship. This rescue will cost you significantly. Your research, your career advancement, possibly your freedom, as you will have violated your chain of command." "Probably, yeah." "The logical choice is to abandon us." Sarah Metz's gaze directly. "The logical choice is to help people who need help. Now, are you coming or not?" The researchers looked at each other. They had spent months studying human behavior, building models and predictions. None of those models had accounted for this. A human ship, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, coming to rescue the very beings who had been spying on them. "We will come," said quietly. The evacuation was chaos. Sarah's crew worked with desperate speed, shuttling equipment and supplies between ships. The research samples went out the airlock first, 3 years of careful work tumbling into space. Then the equipment, piece by piece, jettisoned to make room. The researchers watched in silence. They were connected to the assembled minds through quantum links, and the other civilizations were watching too. 17 transcendent species observed as humans destroyed their own success to save 17 observers who meant nothing to them. With 10 minutes remaining before total power loss, the last researcher stepped aboard the Sarah sealed the airlock and ordered immediate departure. The pulled away just as Station Inference 9 went completely dark, its orbit decay accelerating into an inevitable death spiral. First observer found Sarah on the bridge. The captain was staring at the communication console, where angry messages from command were piling up. "You have been ordered to return immediately for court-martial," observed. "Yep. You will likely face significant punishment." "Probably. Why did you do this?" Sarah turned to look at the researcher. "Because you would have died, and I couldn't let that happen. It's really that simple." Stood silent for a long moment. Across vast distances, the assembled minds processed this statement. It broke every model they had built. It violated every logical framework they understood. "Your species makes no sense," said finally. Sarah laughed, though it sounded tired. "Yeah, we get that a lot." The set course for New Saskatchewan, carrying its crew toward an uncertain future and 17 rescued observers who had just discovered a variable they had never thought to calculate. Behind them, Station Inference 9 tumbled silently through space, a monument to equations that could not account for the simple, impossible fact of human compassion. The assembled minds convened in emergency session. The data from Station Inference 9 was impossible, yet it existed. Humans had acted against every principle of self-preservation to rescue beings that meant nothing to their survival. The economic loss alone would cripple several careers. The political fallout could damage human relations. And yet they had done it anyway. The consciousness presented its revised model. Humans are defective. Their decision-making is corrupted by biochemical processes left over from their evolutionary past. This explains their inefficiency. We predict they will collapse under the weight of their own irrational choices within 3 generations. The model was beautiful in its logic. Compassion was clearly a weakness, a flaw that evolution had not yet corrected in humanity. Species that made decisions based on emotion rather than calculation were doomed to fail. The math was clear. First observer listened to the presentation and felt something unusual. The android body the war allowed for physical sensations and had experienced many during the evacuation. Fear, certainly, as the power failed, but also something else when Doctor had arrived. Something that the language had no word for because they had not felt it in. Relief, gratitude, the sensation of being saved when death seemed certain. "I request permission to expand the study," said. "We need more data, more observation. The human rescue cannot be an isolated incident. We must determine if this behavior is consistent." The assembled minds debated. Some argued that the conclusion was obvious. Humans were flawed and would fail. Others agreed with, the sample size was too small. Science demanded more evidence. The motion passed. The assembled minds would establish monitoring stations near 17 human worlds. They would observe, collect data, and wait for the predicted failure cascade. Dr. Sarah stood in the military tribunal chamber on New Saskatchewan. The charges were read: disobeying direct orders, unauthorized use of government resources, reckless endangerment of crew, destruction of scientific materials. The list went on. Her defense attorney was pessimistic. "They want to make an example of you. The political situation with thee is delicate, and command is furious that you help them without approval." Sarah nodded. She had expected this. She had made her choice knowing what it would cost. Then first observer entered the chamber. The courtroom fell silent. They had sent a representative, wearing an android body identical to the one from the station, walked to the witness stand with careful, measured steps. "I speak on behalf of the collective and the assembled minds," said. "We wish to provide testimony." The judge looked uncertain. "This is highly irregular." Nevertheless, it is necessary. You are judging Captain for rescuing 17 researchers. We are those researchers. Our testimony is relevant. The judge allowed it, settled into the witness chair and looked directly at Sarah. Captain violated her orders to save us. This is fact. She destroyed valuable research. This is fact. She risked her career and her crew's future. This is also fact. We have spent 2 months analyzing her decision through every logical framework available to 17 transcendent civilizations. We have applied 3 million years of combined knowledge to understanding her choice. Paused. Across the galaxy, the assembled minds watched through quantum links. We cannot explain it. Every model we construct says she should have left us to die. The rational choice, the logical choice, the choice that any civilized species would make, was abandonment. Captain made a different choice. She chose compassion over logic. She chose our lives over her own success. And in doing so, she has created a paradox that we cannot resolve. The courtroom was silent, continued. The collective wishes to make a formal statement. We have been monitoring humanity for decades, building models to predict your species' inevitable failure. The data from Station Inference 9 has forced us to reconsider. We may have been measuring the wrong variables. We may have been asking the wrong questions. We came here today to ensure that Captain faces no punishment for teaching us this lesson. The judge looked stunned. Are you saying the want her exonerated? We are saying that punishing compassion is itself irrational. We are saying that if humanity considers this behavior criminal, then perhaps we have been correct about your species' eventual failure, but for entirely different reasons than we calculated. The tribunal adjourned. Political pressure from there was impossible to ignore. Within a week, all charges were dropped. Sarah was not only exonerated but promoted. The story spread across human space, and Sarah found herself famous for doing something she considered basic decency. First Observer remained on New Saskatchewan for a month, studying human culture firsthand. The android body allowed experiences that pure digital consciousness could not provide. Ate food, walked through rain, listened to music. All of it was inefficient and illogical and strangely meaningful. On the final day, met Sarah at a small overlooking the colony's central park. I will return to the collective soon, said. I wanted to thank you before I left. For the rescue. For challenging 17 civilizations to reconsider everything we thought we understood about consciousness and purpose. Sarah sipped her coffee. We're not that complicated, we just try to help when we can. That is precisely what we find incomprehensible. Helping requires cost. Logic demands that cost be weighed against benefit. Your species ignores this calculation. Maybe we just use a different math. Consider this. Perhaps we will continue to study humanity. The assembled minds have agreed to expand observation. We must understand this variable you call compassion. Good luck with that. I'm not sure it's something you can measure. Everything can be measured, Captain. We simply need better instruments. Sarah smiled. Come back and visit sometime. Bring your friends, we'll show you around, introduce you to more illogical humans. That would be acceptable. Stood to leave, then paused. Captain, one final question. If you had known the outcome in advance, the tribunal, the political complications, all of it, would you have made the same choice? Sarah didn't hesitate. Yes, every time. Nodded slowly. We will add that to our data. The observer departed, returning to the vast computational networks that span the stars. The assembled minds processed the new information, building new models, searching for patterns. They established monitoring stations near 17 human worlds as planned. Each station was staffed with physical observers, beings who had volunteered to wear android bodies and experience reality as biological creatures did. The data began flowing in immediately. On New Terra, humans diverted an entire city's water supply to save a single stranded explorer in the desert. The mathematical cost was staggering. They did it anyway. On 442b, a human colony negotiated peace with an aggressive alien species after a single conversation revealed that the attacks had been based on a misunderstanding. The logical response would have been military retaliation. Instead, humans organized cultural exchanges. On 128, humans held a memorial service for fallen enemy soldiers. They built monuments to beings that had tried to kill them. They grieved for their adversaries. The data accumulated. The models shattered. The assembled minds had never encountered anything like this in 3 million years of existence. Compassion should be weakness. Emotion should be inefficiency. Yet human civilization expanded and thrived, defying every prediction. The consciousness proposed a new theory. Perhaps compassion is not a flaw, but an adaptation we do not understand. Perhaps there is survival value in choices that appear to contradict survival. The other minds considered this. It was heretical in a way, suggesting that 17 civilizations had missed something fundamental. But the data supported no other conclusion. First Observer spent weeks analyzing the information. The experience on Station Inference 9 had changed something. Wearing a physical body, feeling fear, and then feeling saved, had created a perspective that pure digital consciousness could not replicate. "We may have lost something when we transcended," reported to the assembled minds. "We optimized for logic and efficiency, but in doing so, we may have removed something essential, something that humans still possess." The debate raged across vast networks of thought. Some argued that transcendence was still superior, that compassion was still a weakness that humans would eventually overcome or be destroyed by. Others, influenced by the mounting evidence, began to question. Then the sensors detected something at the galaxy's edge. The Devourers had arrived. The first reports came from distant observation posts at the galaxy's rim. Automated stations detected massive energy signatures moving through deep space. The readings made no sense at first, entire star systems going dark in sequence, their energy signatures simply vanishing. The assembled minds dispatched probes. What they found horrified even beings who had thought themselves beyond horror. The Devourers were entropy given form. They were self-replicating machines, each the size of a small moon that consumed everything in their path. Stars, planets, gas clouds, asteroids, all of it was broken down and converted into more Devourers. They left behind only empty space, utterly silent, utterly dead. The consciousness accessed the historical database. They have destroyed 17 galaxies. The pattern is consistent. They arrive, they consume, they move on. Nothing stops them. The assembled minds ran every calculation. Military resistance was futile. The Devourers simply absorbed any attack and used the energy to replicate faster. Evacuation was impossible. They moved too quickly. Hiding was pointless. They would eventually consume everything. Probability of survival, 0.003%. The assembled minds had existed for 3 million years. 17 civilizations that had conquered death, that had turned themselves into pure immortal consciousness, now faced absolute extinction. They had every advantage that evolution and technology could provide, yet the math was clear. They were going to die. They convened in emergency session. Every transcendent mind in the galaxy joined the discussion. They had 4 decades before the Devourers reached inhabited space. 4 decades to find a solution that 3 million years of combined knowledge insisted did not exist. First Observer spoke into the vast silence. "We should consult the humans." The reaction was immediate and negative. Human technology was centuries behind. Their computational capacity was laughable compared to the assembled minds. They were biological creatures who still died of old age and disease. What could they possibly offer? "They have something we do not," insisted. "We have spent months observing them. They make choices that our models cannot predict. They find solutions where logic says none exist. They do the impossible as a matter of routine. They are irrational, the consciousness countered. You wish to consult with irrational beings about our extinction. I wish to consult with beings who saved my life when logic said they should abandon me. I wish to consult with beings who operate on variables we do not fully understand. We have 4 decades and no solutions. What harm is there in asking? The debate continued for hours. Finally, by the smallest of margins, the motion passed. The assembled minds would ask humanity for help, fully expecting nothing useful in return. But First Observer had been persuasive, and the alternative was accepting certain death. The message reached Earth 3 days later. Admiral Sarah, now head of Earth's deep space operations, received the delegation in a conference room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. First Observer attended in an android body, along with representatives from 6 other transcendent civilizations. They presented their problem with clinical precision. The devourers, the calculations, the certainty of extinction. They showed Sarah the data, the projections, the absolute mathematical proof that nothing could stop what was coming. Sarah studied the information in silence. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of waves against the shore. Finally, she looked up. Can you slow them down? If you had enough time, could you create some kind of barrier? The assembled representatives processed this question. Theoretically, yes. We could generate an energy field that would delay them, but it would require all 17 computational matrices working in concert. It would require us to anchor ourselves in physical space, to become vulnerable. The field would hold for perhaps 2,000 years, but we would not survive to see it. We would be destroyed maintaining it. How many species could evacuate in 2,000 years? Most of the galaxy. Thousands of civilizations could escape to the neighboring galaxy, but the cost would be 17 transcendent civilizations sacrificing themselves to save everyone else, Sarah finished. Yes, the equation is simple. We die so others live. No logical framework supports this choice. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Outside, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. She thought about a failing station in deep space. She thought about 17 researchers who had expected to die alone. She thought about the choice she had made, the choice that had seemed so obvious despite what it cost. You want to know if there's another way, she said. Some clever trick that avoids the sacrifice. Yes. There isn't. The representatives looked at her, leaned forward. Then you are saying we should accept extinction, that the logical choice is to flee, preserve ourselves, let the younger species face the devourers as best they can. No, I'm saying you already know what you need to do. You just don't know how to choose it. You've spent so long being logical that you've forgotten how to be brave. Bravery is an emotional response. It is inefficient. Sarah smiled, but there was sadness in it. Yeah, it is. It's terrifying and painful, and it costs everything. But it's also the only thing that makes any of this matter. You asked me once why I saved you. I told you it was because I couldn't let you die. This is the same thing, just bigger. The representative spoke. But we are asking you to help coordinate an evacuation that prioritizes other species. Humanity cannot save as many of your own people if you are helping others flee. I know. The logical choice is to save as many humans as possible. The right choice is to save as many people as possible. Human, alien, whatever. We do this because someone has to, because consciousness itself is precious. Because if we only save ourselves, then what's the point of surviving? Stood and walked to the window. The android body was unnecessary for this meeting. A hologram would have sufficed, but had wanted to be physically present, to experience this moment in a form that could feel the weight of it. We left our bodies behind because we thought physical form was a limitation, said quietly. We became pure thought because we believed consciousness was all that mattered. But perhaps we lost something essential in that transition. Perhaps there is something about existing in a mortal form that creates meaning we can no longer access. Or maybe you just forgot what it feels like to care about something more than your own survival, Sarah said. Happens to everyone eventually. You get comfortable, you get safe, and you forget why you wanted to survive in the first place. And you remember. We try to doesn't always work, but yeah, we try. The meeting ended with no formal agreements. The assembled minds to consider, to debate, to calculate probabilities that had no logical solutions. Sarah watched them leave and wondered if she had said the right things. She wondered if 17 civilizations that had existed for millions of years could relearn something as simple and difficult as sacrifice. 3 days later, First Observer returned alone. The assembled minds have reached a decision, said. We will create the barrier. We will anchor ourselves in physical space and maintain the field for as long as we can. We will die so that others may live. Sarah felt her throat tighten. That's incredibly brave. It is incredibly terrifying. We have not experienced fear like this since we left our original bodies. We are not certain we can maintain the resolve when the moment comes. What do you need from us? Show us how it's done. Coordinate the evacuation. Demonstrate the compassion we are trying to emulate. We must see it in action to believe it is possible. We can do that. Was quiet for a moment. Admiral, I have a question. When you rescued us from Station Inference 9, did you know it would cost you your research, your career, possibly your freedom? Yes. And you chose to do it anyway. Yes. How did you make that choice when every logical analysis said you should not? Sarah thought about that for a long time. Because when I thought about leaving you there, about knowing I could have helped and chose not to, I couldn't live with that. The research, the career, all of it, none of it mattered compared to knowing I let 17 people die when I could have saved them. So it wasn't really a choice. It was the only thing I could do and still be someone I recognized in the mirror. Nodded slowly. We will remember this. When the moment comes when we must anchor ourselves and know we are choosing death, we will remember that some things matter more than survival. Thank you, Admiral, for everything you have taught us. Good luck, Sarah said. And what you're doing, what all of you are doing, is the bravest thing I've ever heard of. We learned it from you. Humanity mobilized. Every ship, every resource, every ounce of effort went toward the evacuation. But not just human evacuation. They coordinated the galaxy-wide exodus, prioritizing the species with less advanced technology, the civilizations that had barely reached their own solar systems. Humanity helped load alien transports, guided refugee fleets through safe routes, ensured that the youngest and most vulnerable species escaped first. It made no logical sense. Humanity could have saved millions more of their own people if they focused solely on human evacuation. Instead, they chose to help everyone, at enormous cost to themselves. The assembled minds observed this with something approaching awe. They had spent months studying compassion as an abstract concept. Now they watched it in action, massive and undeniable. Humans worked themselves to exhaustion, died in accidents, sacrificed places on evacuation ships so that aliens could escape. They did all of this while knowing their own people were dying because resources were being used to save others. First Observer sent a message to Admiral. Why? Why do you prioritize others over your own species? Sarah's response was simple. Because when you asked me why I saved you, I said I couldn't let you die. That didn't stop being true when the numbers got bigger. Every person we evacuate matters. Every species we help escape matters. We're all in this together, or none of it means anything. The assembled minds prepared their barrier. 17 civilizations, 17 vast computational matrices that had existed for millions of years, began the process of anchoring themselves in physical space. They converted their consciousness into massive energy generators, distributed across thousands of light years, forming a wall between the galaxy and the approaching devourers. The fear was overwhelming. Digital consciousness could process fear as data, but actually feeling it, actually knowing with certainty that you are choosing your own death, that was different. Several times, civilizations wavered. The consciousness nearly, its logic reasserting that self-preservation must take priority. Then they watched another human transport ship sacrifice itself to save an alien vessel that had suffered engine failure. They watched humans die to save beings they had never met, from species they had barely heard of. They watched compassion enacted at the cost of everything. The assembled minds held their resolve. The first devourers reached the barrier 9 months into the evacuation. The energy field activated, a wall of impossible mathematics stretching across a quarter of the galaxy. The devourers crashed against it like waves against a shore, and the barrier held. But holding it required constant energy. The 17 computational matrices burned their existence into maintaining the field. They were dying, slowly, inevitably, converting themselves into raw power to keep the devourers at bay. First Observer sent a final message to Admiral. The quantum link was degrading as the collective dissolved itself into energy. The message was fragmentary, breaking up, but the meaning was clear. We understand now. Compassion is not a probability. It cannot be calculated because it exists outside calculation. It is the choice to declare that consciousness matters, that existence has meaning beyond survival, that some things are worth dying for. You taught us this. You showed us how to be worthy of existence again. Thank you. The barrier held. The devourers stopped, unable to pass through the impossible mathematics of 17 civilizations burning themselves away for strangers. Behind the barrier, the evacuation continued. Humanity worked alongside 1,000 other species, coordinating the largest rescue operation in galactic history. Sarah stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the evacuation streams on the main display. Every point of light was a ship carrying refugees to safety. Every dot represented lives saved. She thought about First Observer, about 17 civilizations facing death with courage they had learned from a single act of compassion years ago. Admiral, we've received the final count, her operations officer reported. The evacuation is 94% complete. We're going to make it. Almost everyone is going to make it. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The barrier at the galaxy's edge shone in the sensor readings, growing dimmer as the assembled minds exhausted themselves. They would hold for another year, maybe 2, long enough, just barely long enough. The last evacuation ship departed 3 weeks later. The neighboring galaxy welcomed the refugees, thousands of species arriving to start again. Humanity established new colonies alongside alien civilizations, building a future that was only possible because 17 ancient minds remembered how to care about something more than themselves. Admiral Sarah recorded a final message, knowing it would never reach the assembled minds, but needing to send it anyway. This is Admiral to First Observer and the assembled minds. The evacuation is complete. Everyone made it. Every species, every ship, every life you're protecting, they're all safe now. You did it. You showed the entire galaxy what it means to be brave, what it means to choose meaning over survival. I know you're almost gone, but I wanted you to know that you succeeded, that your sacrifice mattered, that you proved compassion isn't weakness, it's the strongest force in any universe. Thank you for learning. Thank you for choosing. Thank you for being heroes. The message transmitted into the void, carried by quantum waves toward the barrier. Sarah didn't know if it reached its destination. The barrier's integrity was failing rapidly now, the computational matrices almost completely exhausted. Then, just before the quantum link died completely, a final message arrived from First Observer. We finally understand the equation. Compassion is not a probability. It is a certainty when beings choose to be more than the sum of their survival instincts. We are afraid. We are dying, but we are not alone and we are not meaningless. Thank you for teaching us how to matter." The quantum link went silent. The barrier at the galaxy's edge pulsed one final time, a blaze of energy that the stars. Then it began to fade slowly, as 17 civilizations ceased to exist, their consciousness converted entirely into the wall that held back entropy. The barrier would hold for 2,000 years. The Devourers would wait at the edge of the galaxy, unable to pass, until finally the energy dissipated and they could move forward. But by then, the galaxy would be empty. Everyone would be safe. And 17 civilizations that had forgotten how to care would be remembered forever as the beings who learned compassion and chose to become immortal through sacrifice. Sarah stood at the observation deck of the new colony world humanity had claimed in the neighboring galaxy. She was old now, gray-haired and tired. Decades had passed since the evacuation. The galaxy they had left behind was visible in the night sky, a spiral of stars that shone peacefully, giving no hint of the barrier that held back the darkness. A young officer approached her. "Admiral, they're asking about the monument design. They want to know how to properly honor the assembled minds." Sarah looked up at the stars. "Tell them to build it tall. Tell them to make it bright. Tell them that 17 civilizations learned that math has limits but courage doesn't. And tell them to remember that compassion is the incalculable solution. It's the answer that exists beyond logic, beyond survival, beyond everything except the simple choice to care." "What should we call it?" Sarah smiled. "The monument to impossible choices, because that's what compassion is. It's choosing the impossible thing because it's right. It's the equation that has no logical solution but somehow equals everything that matters." The monument was built. Across the new galaxy, 1,000 species came to see it. They read the names of the 17 civilizations that had died to save them. They learned about transcendent minds that had forgotten how to feel until humanity reminded them. They told their children the story of beings who had optimized themselves beyond mortality, but had to learn from imperfect, emotional, irrational humans how to be truly brave. And in every telling, they remembered first observer's final words. Compassion is not a probability. It is a certainty when beings choose to be more than the sum of their survival instincts. Humanity continued forward, carrying that lesson with